I want to begin. You're on the front page this morning. I don't know if you...
Not the front page and the sports page there. No. Oh, yes, I see that.
Yeah. So in about an hour, a little over, the Supreme Judicial Court hears oral arguments on your decision not to certify the repeal of the gambling law. The Herald suggests this morning that that is a political gamble, is it?
First, let me put it in context. The AG has many hats to wear and many jobs to do that most people don't see that often. One of them is when the application for petitions for articles to appear on the ballot, the Attorney General does a threshold review of whether these are appropriate topics for a ballot question and whether they are in the appropriate form. So when these came up, they're filed a year ago, May. The decisions were made in September. We did as we always did with the 20 plus questions, is look at, based upon, as we see the facts and the law in this question, is this appropriate topic to go on a ballot question? Certain of them are out. They can't be related to the courts. They can't be related to funding issues. And there are other areas like implied contracts that guide us in our determinations as to whether they're appropriate topics or not. Our decision was made. We knew at the time we did it that it would be appealed by either side, and so we made it clear that this was our decision. We would work with both sides to facilitate it for the Supreme Court to make a determination, and that's what we've done.
Isn't there a rubber meets the road test here, though? Shouldn't people have the chance to decide whether this law should be repealed?
Well, but that's what the SJC is going to decide today. They're going to hear arguments today and they will decide, because it is clear that although the founders wanted the people to have options other than just their elected representatives in the House and the Senate, they also limited those occasions in which they did, understanding there's an orderly way in which business of the people does go forward. And so this is a question that I think is close. I think the court could agree with us, but I don't have tea leaves on this. So I understand that the court will make this decision, but this is not always just about, you know, can people decide this or that? Of course I believe in democracy. I believe in all of the people's rights to be heard. But that is exactly what the court has to decide. Is this a question in this form that now, since the legislature's already decided an issue, should it go on the ballot or not?
Not to belabor this, but what was the key factor in your decision not to certify this? That
the representatives, elected representatives of the people, had voted somewhat overwhelmingly to say this is an arena in which we want to move forward for business development. We are inviting businesses to come in, to invest money, to rely upon the decision of the House of Representatives and the Senate, signed by the governor, to make business decisions. And that there's a contract that they've already entered into. And for the courts now to say, and it could be true in any context, it's not just this context, the principles we apply have to do with any context. Obviously the people pushing for this don't want casinos. We have to make a decision based upon not whether you're in favor of casinos or not, but what are the principles that allow for a question like this to be on the ballot for any business in which the legislature's already let that business go forward.
Should Boston be considered a host city in this process?
You know, I think that the decisions were pretty clear based on the definitions at the time, but what I will say is that we've gone into uncharted territory here with allowing for gambling. We've played in the Attorney General's office a big role in trying to structure that gaming commission. We took a good look and said, look, we don't have a money laundering statute in Massachusetts, we should have one. And so some of these questions come up that are getting answered as we move along. On paper, Boston's probably not a host community, but
not the way the letter of the law.
The way the letter of the law, but we also know that we look at the spirit of the law too, and so those are also decisions. I think that this gambling commission, the gaming commission, in looking at fairness, is trying to determine whether or not, in both the letter and the spirit of the law, that should be determined.
Let me stick with gambling for a moment. Northwind Strategies works on your campaign, Doug Rubin's political consulting firm. It also represents Mohegan Sun, which has the proposal for the Revere Casino. Conflict of interest here?
First of all, no, there's absolutely no conflict of interest. We also made this decision starting last May, announced in September, you know, almost before, well before they became involved in my campaign for governor, which is separate from my job as Attorney General. So there is no conflict of interest. I don't believe there's a apparent conflict of interest.
This is a busy campaign, even though we're early in it. We've got 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans, a Libertarian, 3 Independents. What's the defining issue for voters in this campaign?
You know, with 9 people running for governor, I will say voters have choices, and I think there are lots of great people in this race. The defining campaign issue, which I think is often the defining campaign issue, is about how we are going to proceed in this economy and provide jobs for people in Massachusetts. I believe that, and I believe that's what resonates with voters. I've said we've got a critical opportunity now in Massachusetts to turn this economy around for everybody, not just folks at the top. They're doing very well, thank you, but for everybody, and not just for Boston and Cambridge. I think this economic turnaround has to be for every region in Massachusetts. In Berkshire County, where Rick and I grew up, where our hospital just closed. That's not a good economic indicator, and it's a real problem. But I believe that we have 6 or 7 microeconomies here in Massachusetts. We have great things going on in Merrimack Valley, the South Shore, not to be confused with the South Coast, not to be confused with what's happening in Springfield and Worcester. And if we build the kind of strong economy that I think we can, based on what's happening in all of those regions, with the state as a good partner, and invest in our kids and our workforce to make sure that as the jobs grow, we have the workforce for those jobs, we can be very successful here in Massachusetts in seeing this economy and turn around for everybody.
Save that thought, because I want to come back to some of those issues. You have a 30-point lead over your nearest competitor at this point, and it's still early. And I know polls aren't votes over Steve Grossman. Is there a danger this early in being pegged as the front runner, as the presumptive nominee?
There might be, if anybody was paying attention to the race. I say that...
Let's do this again after Labor Day.
Well, look, one of the things that I've learned in races that I've won and lost, and I've won for district attorney and for attorney general. As you may know, I've lost 2 races, one to the current mayor of Boston. I said I played a small but critical role in helping Marty Walsh get elected when I lost in that state reps race many moons ago. But I learned a lot then about door knocking and people contact. Obviously, in the Senate race, a short special election, the result wasn't what I wanted, what most Democrats in Massachusetts didn't want. But I learned a couple of lessons from that. One is that people want to see you, they want to hear from you. I said if I was going to run for governor and decided to do that we were going to run a grassroots campaign and get out into our communities and talk to people, which I've been doing every day since September. I was door knocking in Framingham on Saturday, literally. We've door knocked in Worcester. We've got all of our signatures in. We've knocked over 10,000 doors this past weekend. I will continue to do that because I believe, and I think it's been demonstrated in Massachusetts, that whatever the polls say or whatever the newspapers say, it is about what voters want. They want to feel that you represent their interests, that you're going to work hard for them, and then you care about what happens to them. That's what I've done as Attorney General. It's what I've done as DA, standing up for people, defending, challenging the Defense of Marriage Act, going after Wall Street, that took, trying to keep people in their homes. All of those things, I think, is I knock doors and talk to people one-on-one. That's what resonates with them. So I'm going to continue to do that through September, and I hope through November.
Attorney General has not historically been a great launching pad for the governor's office. In fact, it's been, nearly 60 years since a constitutional officer was elected to the corner office in Massachusetts. What's going on there? Have you thought about that?
Well, first of all, well-behaved women seldom make history, and so we're going to make history this time around in changing that. Look, I've been asked that, and I know in other states, attorneys general, both men and women, have been successful in moving forward to the governor's job. And I understand that people ask that question, but I think every race is different. And I think that the reasons races in Massachusetts are very competitive. In every race, there are lots of people who don't become governor, so I don't think you can draw conclusions that just in the past, certain people haven't been successful, so that job is not a good launching area for that. But, I think what voters want to see is what you're going to do as governor. And one of the things they look at is what you've done in your past position. What have you done in the offices you've held or in the private sector if you're coming in? I think that's what they look at, not what the title is, but what have you been able to do? And that's why I'm really proud of my record as Attorney General in keeping people in their homes, preventing unnecessary foreclosures, passing a human trafficking statute, passing a anti-bullying statute for kids. The kind of work we've done as Attorney General, I think, resonates with people that I would be a governor who will stand up for them and fight those fights.
I've wondered whether it's an insider-outsider thing.
I think in any race, you know, you can look back and draw conclusions based upon that, but I think every race is different and moving forward. I think the thing that's going to matter in this race is ideas and organizing, and that's what I've been focused on, and I intend to keep doing that.
You would be the first woman elected governor of Massachusetts. Is that an extra responsibility, for you to carry as a candidate?
You know, at this stage of the game, I think that people are looking at candidates and their ideas. Look, we had 2 women run in the race to succeed Ed Markey for his Congress seat. And Catherine Clark won that race, but that's because I think she worked hard. We had 5 good candidates in that race. We have 2 women in this race, and I don't think people are focused on the specific gender as much as who is going to do the best job. And I say this on the trail all the time. When I graduated from law school, my dad gave me the plaque that said sometimes the best man for the job is a woman. You know, that I can't change who I am, what my background's been, but I believe that my record in working for people and working for families and working to level the playing field, I think is what people are looking at. And look, I'll be honest, I had a call from somebody not too long ago saying, I'm supporting you because you've done a great job, and I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I want her to see that women in Massachusetts can run for governor and be successful. And I hope, as we've seen more women on the bench in business, that we do make this an economy moving forward, that everybody participates at, everybody can be at the table.
I want to move to the Department of Children and Families. We all have had broken hearts over this Jeremiah Oliver story over the last several months and over the last week, the funeral. There's the sense that this is an agency that is broken. What would you do to fix it?
Well, this is an agency that has a very broad and I think very difficult mandate. I've worked with this agency for years as a child abuse prosecutor, as a district attorney, as an attorney general. It has enormous responsibility, increased responsibility, with budgets that have been cut, and this has been true through Republican and Democratic governors. One thing I think that's crucial is we look at the mandate we give this agency. We say you're supposed to keep families safe, and you're supposed to keep families together, and you're supposed to keep children safe. And I think those 2 things sometimes come head on. Not that they can't be reconciled, but if you take and we have a large number of young, not experienced necessarily social workers who are well-intentioned, who have too many cases, who are going into very tough family situations, and they're being told, you're supposed to keep this family together, but by the way, you're supposed to keep this child safe, or these children safe. They often don't have access or time to do the investigations that are appropriate to make those tough decisions. I have heard, since I worked in child abuse in the early 90s, DSS then and DCF commissioners say, we make 2 mistakes. We leave kids in and we take them out. And so if we're going to fix that problem, you never want to be removing children just because the pendulum has swung too far, and you don't want to be leaving children in because the mandate is supposed to be keeping families together. I believe we could restructure the agency, put a separate division within the agency whose only job for those 10% or 15% of cases where the children are really at risk of serious physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, that then that child has someone who follows him or her. That their responsibility is to determine, is it safe to leave this child where he or she is? If not, where should they be? And one other thing I think can happen. You know, when DSS takes a child out, they've made that decision. They don't go back and reassess, can the child go back in? But many of these circumstances are fluid. If a child is unsafe because mom or dad has a boyfriend or a spouse who isn't safe for the child, but that situation changes, the child could go back to the family. But if the child has an advocate to make sure that child is going to be safe in the home with relatives, can go back, you're going to have better results across a range of cases, and you will make sure with, I think, better resources, better technology so that we can keep track of our children. We shouldn't be relying upon 51As filed that are faxed that get lost. Those are going to result in the kind of tragedies like Jeremiah Olive that I've seen for too many years. It does break your heart, Artie, and we can do better than that. I'm convinced that we can do better.
Is part of the problem here the caseload? I think the rules call for a dozen cases a month. The union says some caseworkers are dealing with 30 or more every month. Is it simply a matter of people and trained people?
Well, that's part of it, but that's not enough. And I think when caseloads are too large, you raise all of the factors. Too many people, not enough supervision, too many cases. And then, look, not all cases are created equal. Some workers could have 2 cases that might be too much. And so we need to make those judgments around where are the families where our social services input can keep them together and keep those kids safe, but where are that 10 to 15% of cases where we know, because if we have the right teams involved, the risk assessment is going to say that child has to come out. He's already been sexually abused or physically abused. There are cases where that's already happened and those children remain in those circumstances. We know they should be removed at least for a time being. And I'll say something else. I think that we've been very reactive around providing social services both to kids and families. And one of the things I feel very strongly about in looking at how we do better for all kids in education is let's provide support counselors in every school so that when the child comes in late or comes in hungry or comes in and reports abuse or comes in with learning disabilities, we don't wait until there's a disaster and the 51A gets filed. Let's have those services available for that child and those families as early as possible. Early intervention, having the social work available at the time, we're going to keep that caseload down. We're going to get better results for kids. We're going to keep them safer. And we're going to keep more kids in those families that we want to with the supports that we need. We have the ability to do that now. And we always are a little bit late in adopting the technology, adopting what we know about social work. And if we were to intervene, provide those services earlier, we'd get much better results.
I want to move to healthcare, an area where you've been very, very busy over the last couple of years. We've led the way in Massachusetts on healthcare reform. We're a leader on access. It seems that we pretty much solved that problem with 98% of the population covered. But we're still trying to bend the cost curve. What's Martha Coakley's plan for doing that?
Well, let me just make one note, that is, we've had everybody covered. It also means that they have to not just have insurance, they have to have access to facilities like in North Adams or other places in the state where because of the distances, because of consolidations and mergers, physical access to healthcare may become more difficult.
Hypothetically, the ER at North Adams is due to open sometime middle of May.
We're hoping by May 19th, but that's just the emergency room.
Just the ER.
Yep, for at least for now. Yeah, and thank you to the folks at Berkshire Medical Center who have agreed to take that on because that's crucial. But remember that great enterprise we undertook to say not should we reform healthcare, but how do we do it? And we had Democrats, Republicans, business, labor, consumers, and the providers and the insurance companies all at the table saying let's provide access, let's keep our quality up, and we will have to work on this cost issue. That's what we have been doing since then. And I think although we've bent the cost curve a little bit, we've made some progress on it. I think we continue to look at what we've done in our office, and now the responsibility is moved to the Health Policy Commission, I think through some good legislation, to say, what is it that makes healthcare expensive here in Massachusetts? How do we connect it to total medical expenses, making sure that what we're paying is value we're getting, not just, a knee at one hospital costs this much, and a knee at another hospital costs another amount, even though the outcomes are the same, but it has to do with the marketing clout. That's what we've talked about for a long time, that we should have more transparency, that we should level the playing field in terms of that marketing clout, and we need to make sure that as we move away from a fee-for-service system towards more accountable care, that we're able to include more prevention, more taking care of problems on the physical health side, as not dissimilar to what I just talked about in terms of social work. Let's make sure we intervene and get people in as early as possible. And I think this includes paying much more attention to mental and behavioral health, and that we're required to, by law, provide for equal opportunity payment for that, but we haven't. If you go into an emergency room now because you've been in a car accident, you can go right to the surgery room if you need a leg set. If you go in with a psychiatric emergency, the doctor may be on the phone for hours, if not the weekend, or several days to get authorization to find a bed for you. So we don't have access. And one doctor said to me, someone comes in and says, I don't feel well. So the doctor says, well, I can do an MRI, I can do a CAT scan, I can do all these tests. And in the end, I may not know why the person doesn't feel well. He said, what I'd like to be able to do is say, how's your life? What's your stress level like? Maybe there is emotional, psychological issue or stress issue that if we were able to deal with without the stigma, deal with up front, we would do much better in addressing what I think is a crisis in emotional, behavioral, mental health issues that we just don't address here.
Are you satisfied with the benchmarks that we're using now, that system of limiting cost increases to a percentage of gross state product? Is that working?
Yeah, well, it is for the moment, and I think the idea was, let's do this in ways that we work towards a goal of bending the cost curve so that it's affordable. And I think the idea was, let's send the market the message that, look, if you can reform this on your own, through competition, efficiencies, you can keep costs down, that's great. But we're going to keep an eye on that. And so it is allowed for the market to adjust, to take on some of these issues of looking better at risk and looking better at more prevention, accountable care. But I think it also leaves open the door that if they can't do that or they don't do that, then the legislature could act again.
We've seen a wave of healthcare mergers and consolidations over the last couple of years, and it seems like all of them have been pitched with the argument that this is the way you bend the cost curve, this is the way you save money. Yet there's a fair amount of evidence that suggests that's not the case.
Well, the market is fluid right now, and so part of it I think we need to understand is that as we look towards those goals, I think that some of those consolidations and mergers have made sense for those institutions, but I think, again, the key is we're going to keep a watchful eye and say, if you are going to do that, make your case that that's what's going to happen, and if you are allowed to do that, you got to continue to make your case that that's where we're headed, and if not, then the legislature or the Health Policy Commission and the Attorney General's office still has some opportunity to kind of, be a little bit of a referee on this and say, look, this was what you intended to do, but that's not what's happened. And I appreciate that as we move forward towards more acceptance of risk and making sure that people are doing more prevention and accountable care, that some changes are going to have to take place. The one thing we have been very strong about saying is that we have had a dysfunctional market with some players having more clout for reimbursement. That has to change. We're trying to find ways to do that while we move forward. I'm very proud of what we've done in healthcare in Massachusetts. We have it's part of our terrific history. It's going to be part of our future. And I think everything that's happened so far has been very healthy. We have continued to have all those players at the table, just as we did back in 2004, saying, let's continue to look at good quality care, good access for everybody. Let's continue to cut costs. And although we don't always agree on every step, I think we've all agreed on those goals. And I've said, by the way, it's one of the reasons why Massachusetts is such a great place to be Attorney General. I'm always bragging to my colleagues around the country about how great Massachusetts is, and they're sick of hearing me say it. But look at what we did in healthcare, and look at the ways in which we have those relationships with our business community, with our legislators, with our private sector folks, and our not-for-profits around healthcare. I believe in the future around energy, what we do around energy. We have the ability to get together and not say, should we do this, but how do we do this? And we're continuing to do that in healthcare.
With that answer as the context, where do you put Partners and South Shore, that pending case? Where does it fit?
Well, if I could comment on that, I would. But nice try, R.D.
When will we know? It's been pending for a long time.
You'll know
Give
soon.
us a time?
Soon.
A week?
Probably, I actually said, because I had asked this to the South Shore last week, within a month or two, and maybe shorter than that.
Okay. Implementation of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, has brought new federal regulations that have been imposed on the states. And in some cases, those new regs are at odds with what the states have been doing. And we've run into that in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. How do you square that? And would you seek a waiver from federal regulations if things are working in Massachusetts?
Well, we've already sought that, and I was disappointed initially that we didn't get it, but we've actually gotten some good news very recently. I know Congressman Tierney and others have been working on this, but I've seen that our outgoing Secretary of Health and Human Services, Janet Sebelius, indicated that Massachusetts was going to get some time reprieve and also left open the door to more permanent waivers. I think that's only fair, since we are one of the states that has made it work here, and that it is, I think, unfair for the federal government to come in and say, well, we're going to do something else and different that is a disadvantage, particularly for businesses, but also for consumers here. So I think that's encouraging news, and I would certainly push for that. I think one of the things that will make this work across the country is giving states enough flexibility to allow them to figure out, as we did, how you get there and how you keep people at the table.
If it ain't broke, don't let the feds fix it.
I spend a lot of my time these days suing federal agencies with 3 or 4 letters in their names, whether it's DOMA or FEMA on the flood mortgage insurance. We were the first Attorney General's office to go sue the EPA way back, saying you're not doing your job on climate change. And you know, we argue before the Supreme Court, we're losing a foot of Cape Cod every year, and that made a difference, and that's one of the reasons why we were successful.
The state legislature is also a player in this process, and every year employers face new health insurance mandates. In recent study, I think it was 2013, 3 dozen mandated benefits accounted for about $1.5 billion in insurance premiums. And I think it's something on the order of 20 bills are now pending up on Beacon Hill. What's your approach to that? Would you veto that kind of?
Well, the approach I would take is the one we've taken all along, which is we know lots of bills and amendment gets filed for a lot of reasons. The good thing about this process has been, and look, AIM is always at the table. We have representatives from businesses large and small who are on the Health Connector board, who have been very vocal about how we continue to move forward to cut the cost curve. We do have those arguments at the amendment level, but the approach I would take would be the same, which is what's going to be the impact on businesses? Is this something that's in line with what we're trying to accomplish? If it is an unnecessary burden just on businesses, then I think we have to look at that. But so far, I think we've had a very good track record in trying to work with everybody on how we get to that, keeping costs down. It's one of the 2 big barriers here in Massachusetts: energy costs and healthcare costs. I've heard it for 8 years. I continue to hear it. Although I will say, and this is where I'm encouraged, I think we can do cutting energy costs, as we tried to be the ratepayer advocate. I think we can do a lot of work, just the way we did on healthcare, saying let's keep energy costs down, but we need sustainable ways to get clean energy moving forward. We've had a lot of progress doing that. And the other piece that we still have is our workforce. I talked to one company that said our energy costs were high, so we moved to the south to do manufacturing. We moved back up here because we wanted somebody with a good 8th grade education. So that's encouraging to us. That's where we should be making our investment. We're not going to change what Mother Nature does. I might be able to do a lot as governor, but I won't be able to do that. But we can do a lot, I think, to look at, control energy, healthcare costs, and then build up our strength on the workforce side.
That 8th grade education, we hear from businesses, though, that there is still a skills gap.
Yes.
That employers can't find the trained people to do the jobs that need to be done in the 21st century economy. Your solution?
Well, we need to fix that, and we can fix that. We need to work with, I think, immigration policy in the short run around engineers and others, because we have a shortage for that. But in the longer run, we should be building our own workforce, and we can do that here. But look, in the course of this campaign, I've learned things like in 2012, fewer than 600 kids took advanced placement in computer science. That's crazy in a state like Massachusetts. We don't have the teachers to teach it, and we don't have the investment in that curriculum. So the good news is we have businesses like EMC working with Bunker Hill, National Grid working with WPI around that. We have a lot of beginnings of alignment around the kinds of things that businesses are going to need from the workforce of tomorrow, but the state has to be a much better partner in that. I ran into a young woman up in North North County, North Merrimack Valley. She went to a high school teacher and said, I want to take advanced placement computer science, and the guidance counselor said, well, go on the internet. You know, we don't have anybody here to do it. We need to catch up with that. By the same token, I visited Malden High School. I took an hour of coding. You can teach an old dog some new tricks. I did something with the Angry Birds and got them to kill each other, whatever they do. But Paul Marks, who teaches many first-generation kids who speak 47 different languages in Malden High School, has a class of kids who are working with each other. They're learning coding, they're learning computer science, and they are so excited about it. And they said to me, Mr. Marks teaches us how to walk, and we learn how to fly. And I thought, this is what we want for every kid in our state. They should be excited about what they're learning. They should know they are keys to the future. They shouldn't just be learning for the next test and the next answer they have to spit back. We've lost some of that with what we've done. And I think having businesses involved in this process, what are you looking for in your workforce? What do you need? Helping all of our schools, including our 2-year schools and our Voc Tech schools and our 4-year colleges, better align our workforce is our key to our future here. We can do this, and we should do it. And there's no reason that under Governor Coakley we will do it.
Skills gap, also the achievement gap in public schools. How would you close it?
Well, same issue, isn't it, in terms of recognizing what is that gap and what are those resources we need. We've seen with pilot schools, innovation schools, charter schools, great ways that when we invest in giving every child the best education possible, we use new technology, we use up-to-the-date methods that we know about how kids learn. We've seen great accomplishments by kids who never thought they were going to go to college. It's happening in Worcester with the relationship with the Park School and Clark University. It happens with our turnaround schools in Boston. If we say what we mean and we care about closing that achievement gap and we invest in it, we can make that happen. I can't think of anything more important than right now investing in all of our kids. We give them a chance to stay in school, not get in trouble. I've seen this from the other end, by the way, as a DA, seen too many kids who fall off the track by 3rd grade. They're not reading, they're not doing well, they fall behind. We never catch them up. And they end up not being able to make a living, or worse, end up in a very expensive criminal justice system. If we put and it goes back to what I talked about with support counselors in our schools and investing in our kids and our education early. We keep as many kids as possible successful on track, we cut our costs, we get better investments. Sure, it's going to take some money up front, but it's a really good investment.
Are charter schools better?
There is no better or worse here. I think what we're talking about is education reform. We knew we had to do something. And I think that what we've done with charter schools is say, hey, try some stuff out. Let's see what happens. Let's see what works. They have been great models to be able to look at what kind of innovation is successful and what isn't. Not all charter schools have been. I've seen schools that have failed, that haven't had the right structure or accountability. What they have done, though, I think, is given us some ways to look at how we should be paying for and funding and investing in our public schools. And so I think that as we've looked at different ways that kids learn and keeping up to speed with what's the thinking out there, what's the technology, charter schools have played an important role in how we're going to turn this around for everybody. Look, I'm a big believer in public schools. I think we have to continue to invest in them, but I think we have to always ask, are we doing the best in our public schools that we can do?
If you're elected, you'll have to submit a strategic economic development policy statement. What's the Coakley plan for economic development?
Well, it goes to what I think many of the things I've talked about, which is looking at what our strengths and weaknesses are. That we know what many of our strengths are, let's invest in them. Let's make sure we have that workforce. Let's make sure we get and keep the smart folks and the startups. And around that issue, and this is where I think we can do it very well in Massachusetts, look at how we develop all of those regions. What has happened, and I've said this, look, I came in as Attorney General running on a policy of promoting a healthy economy. Wall Street had other ideas. You know, they crashed our economy, they ruined our housing market, they took our homes, frankly. We spent a lot of time rebuilding that economy. Now is the time to invest in the economies on the North Shore, on the South Coast, in and around Boston, Cambridge, in Metro West, in ways with local elected officials, with the local business community, with our not-for-profits, that mean investing in the businesses that will provide jobs, but also investing in not just the kids, but what's the housing and infrastructure that we need that will keep people in those regions, that will say, hey, you know what, I can build a business here and it will grow. My kids and their kids may want to stay here and live here now. Rick and I can talk about graduating from high school and college in northern Berkshire County. We love that part of the state. Most of our high school classmates fled because there was nothing to do. We didn't have jobs. It's not just about jobs, it's making jobs that make sense and are sustainable for those economies. And I am really excited when you talk to folks in New Bedford and Fall River and Taunton about the future they'd like to see and where they're already investing, how the state can be a good player with that. It's true around Boston. We can be helpful with the new mayor in Boston around making sure that we don't do duplicative permitting and we make it easier for people to get businesses started, keep them moving. There are lots of things that we can do. We work with Springfield and Worcester and say, where do you want to go and how can we be helpful? And there are lots of CDCs and regional planning authorities that have great plans on the board already. As this economy turns around, we need to take advantage of that and start investing in keeping that economy moving.
Three more areas before we open it up to everybody here. Business usually says it's overregulated. Is it? And are there any regulations you'd change?
Business always says that, right? And sometimes they're right, and that's why I listen to business. It's why I'm proud of, in our office, we have a business, I affectionately call it BTED, but our Business Technology Economic Development Division that has worked since we came in with seeing where regulations were either duplicatory, overlapping, or in some instances had unnecessary or unseen consequences. One quick example of that, and as governor, I hope to work with the new Attorney General on the ways in which we get rid of those things that are in the way. And as we issue new regulations, there are places where businesses want regulation. I'll give you an example of that. After the TJX identity theft, we said we don't have any rules or regulations around what businesses are required to do. The first set of regulations were a little broad and had some issues, and folks came and said, will you help with this? And that was big businesses and small businesses, and we, I think, worked with the people who are going to be affected by the regulations to say, this is what makes sense, and we got a good set of regulations for business.
There's a November ballot proposal to repeal the law indexing the gasoline tax to inflation. For it or against it?
I am against the repeal of that. In other words, I want to keep it.
What will you do to fully fund the Transportation Finance Act?
Well, good question. I don't have all the answers to that, but I know that that investment in infrastructure is important. I think keeping that method available to the government is important in the first instance. And I think as I look at how we strategically determine what are the important projects, how much are they going to cost, both whether it's a South Coast Rail or looking at more regional transportation, we have to look at what it's going to cost, and then we will figure out, you make your case, and we'll figure out how we do that.
Are you satisfied with the vetting and licensing procedure for marijuana dispensaries?
No.
How would you fix it?
Well, we're in the process now of working with the administration. I believe that unlike in gaming, where we took a lot of time to say this is how we're going to do this is we're going to do background checks. We made a big investment in that. We did not do a similar process for what is also going to be a multi-million-dollar industry at a minimum that's coming into cities and towns, and we've seen a similar NIMBY kind of reaction to this. We are taking on a business that is still illegal under federal law. There are lots of issues about financing and banks. There are just a lot of unanswered questions that I think we need to think through. We're trying to do that now. I certainly, as governor, would take a very good look at that.
There are folks who say it's a pretty short step from dispensaries to decriminalization of marijuana. Do you favor decriminalization? Well,
we've essentially done that. We've already decriminalized the use of marijuana, not to be confused with making it totally legal, but Colorado has made it legal. You know, I actually have spoken with recently the Attorney General, my colleague John Suthers in Colorado. They've had enormous issues with it, as whether people want it or not. It's one of those big changes. I want to look at other states that have done it. I think that given what we've seen already with some of the issues we had not anticipated around with the medical marijuana dispensaries, I think we should look at this issue very cautiously. And just as we now understand we have a big problem with prescription drugs and heroin overdose and usages of other drugs. We should be very careful, I think, before we move into a realm. And I'm most concerned about kids, and I'm concerned about workplace safety. I'm concerned about a lot of issues. I'm going to keep an open mind on this, obviously, but as we've seen, I think sometimes the public thinks something's a good idea. It's our job, those of us who are elected, to make sure we parse through all the consequences of that.
Boulder, my hometown, not just a place, a state of mind.
Rocky Mountain High, right?
And finally, on the subject of government regulation, what does it take to get a wind project built in Massachusetts?
It takes a lot, apparently. But look, you also see, whether you're out west and going over Route 2, you see turbines on the ridge up there. I've spent a lot of time recently traveling all over the state. You see a lot of turbines in cities and towns, clean on-site generation. It is, again, an area that's been not as quick as some would have liked and quicker than what others. I think what we need to do moving forward is look at our whole possible portfolio of moving away from fossil fuel to clean, sustainable energy. Cost-effective sustainable energy, that's always the issue. Like in healthcare, how do we get all three of those things? We're working at it, and I think we're making progress, great progress on it, not just in keeping clean energy, but is a big economic driver in Massachusetts. Cape
Wind, is it time to build it or end it?
I think everybody would say that it's time to build it or end it, and I think in other words, make a decision, right?
What's yours?
Well, at this stage, we're on our path to building it, and so it needs to get finished.